Okay, so what I'm going to talk about today for a little bit is Appyfication. I'm a consultant, so we make up words, and that's mine for today. And one of the questions that people might ask would be, why me? I actually work in the analytics group inside of PwC, and I run the analytics app group. So we build apps for PwC consultants. That's kind of our primary role, and we've been kicking this around for a couple of years, and it's starting to accelerate from our perspective, probably in the last year or so. So I'm gonna break it down, just the difference between analytics for us and apps, just to set a little bit of context. This is sort of a history. It's not really. I just want to talk about, analytics have obviously been around for quite a long time, basically since numbers come out, and you could also call it business intelligence. You could also call it data science, depending on who you're talking to, group here. Or really, if you want to boil it down, it could just be statistics. And that started, inspired by glory, the Romans, probably earlier, but a lot of people talk about it as the Romans, is the collection of information about by and for the state. That's kind of where it started. And then we move on, it gets a bit more interesting, starts to get inspired by gambling. Pascal and Fermat with the probability, right? Which, an interesting pastime that drove advances, and then of course correlation and distribution, normal distributions become important, and then sampling approaches like t-tests were inspired by, I think his name is William Gossett, who is the chief brewer of Guinness. So beer is inspiring us now a little bit further, one of man's favorite pastimes again, and showing us the importance of that in our evolution. And then simulation and multivariate analysis, then we get into machine learning. Machine learning, of course, started with games, right? IBM, Arthur Samuel makes a learning program focused on checkers. The more it plays, the better it plays. Supervised exercise, not unsupervised. But that leads us to unsupervised, or you could talk about it as leading us to unsupervised. It could be leading us to adaptive programming and pattern recognition, all the things that surround that. But for IBM, it led to, chess more than anything else. No, that's not fair. And then, of course, web and text analytics. When you get to the web, it's still out of the information out there, so the Twitter and Facebook, so celebrities, friends, and of course cats, which can't really be analyzed or understood as to why they're so important, but they are. And then that takes us into kind of now where we're dealing with the advanced data visualization, and then of course for us, apps. These guys talked about a bunch of these elements associated with it, so you'll hear some echoes in what I'm talking about. For PwC, we break down sort of data and analytics is the process of collecting, organizing, analyzing the data. That's obviously fairly straightforward, but with the idea that it's going to help you make business decisions, and you can measure the impact of those business decisions to drive, better impact, I guess, into the future. We're now kind of arguing that data fundamentally is a means of production. Very much alongside labor and capital. And you can see Bill Gates talking about it. He's saying it's critical to distance you between your company and the crowd. That if you manage that well, if you handle that information effectively, it can actually determine whether you win or lose. And obviously we agree. So that's kind of the analytics side of things. Let's talk a little bit about the app side of things. So on the left is your view of the traditional view, where it came from. That is, apps were more phone-oriented, and then, of course, applications, somehow being thought of as distinct, were more desktop-oriented. And then apps were more focused. They do one thing or a small number of things, and applications are much broader, and they are more about capabilities and what it can be turned into. And then apps are more personal, and they're not really thought of as being business-oriented, or at least historically. And then apps were more free, at least to start, or cheap, whereas applications are substantially more expensive as a general rule. The issue from our perspective, the way we came to it, is that it really doesn't, I don't care if there's a distinction between an app and an application. I care about simplicity, about being able to use it, about knowing what to go get, what tool to go grab to solve whatever problem it is that you have. So for us, simplicity becomes becomes the key. What's interesting to me, inside of our organization, so we're a consulting firm. We sell services, right? And the idea that we would sell products or applications was roundly rejected for quite a long time. So we actually had to go to the app route in order to begin the process of acceptance, that there might be something interesting here that we could leverage. So go ahead and start small. You're not going to build big things because we don't build software, right? But we do build apps. I'm not sure how they made that fit in their world, but they did for a while, and then it's now we can actually talk about products inside of our organization, whether we call them apps or applications, is becoming increasingly less relevant. For us, there are sort of 4 key trends that help drive the appification that we're observing. Obviously, more data. Everybody talks about it. Is it big data? Is it small data? Is it somewhere in between? There's just more of it. And once we make more of it, we find new things to do with it. Sometimes. And the first challenge for a lot of that was extracting it. Old applications or mainframe type things, it stayed within the tool itself. It didn't get extracted out. And a lot of vendors will talk about the ETL process as being sort of 60, 70, 80% of the value is created there, cleaning it up, getting it out, just being able to do something with it. And it's still true. And then the challenge is mashing it up, and that's become increasingly complex, right? Because it's unstructured to structured, and the structure is different structure, and it doesn't fit together, and we're getting tools that do that or handle that or can identify that. And sort of 90% of all the data that's been generated in the last couple of years, I'm sure you've heard these statistics, but only 1% has been analyzed because it is hard both to extract as well as to put together and compare, right? And then increasingly, the problem is sorting through because there's a large percentage of it that isn't relevant. So you've got a lot of noise and a very small bit of signal that you're trying to get to. And there are lots of different statistics. I just picked one about the NSA and how much they gather. I find the Library of Congress is often a common reference, except for I don't really know how much data that is. I don't have a sense. I know it's a big place. I know there's a lot of books. I know there's a lot of things they store. But they always use it as this reference, so to try to make it somewhat more real. But it's a lot of data, as we all know. So that's one, more data. Second one for us is the consumer apps. Obviously, it starts with the iPhone, but Samsung, Android, Google, all that sort of stuff changes everything. And just a couple of statistics I want to talk about here. So in 2004, Apple started the iPhone project. There was about 1,000 people, and I think it was called Project Purple, at least that's what I was told. About 1,000 people. They spent about $150 million on the iPhone and 30 months to get to it. So from 2004 to June 2007, first release, and there was no App Store. Right? I was kind of doing the research in preparation for this, and I had forgotten that, of course, it came out and they had some stuff that you used, but no App Store. Right? And so no democratization of it, no ability for other people to create and get this stuff on. They kind of controlled it. And then about a year later, as it shows on here, they come out with 2.0 and they come out with the App Store and Android's fast follower in later that year in September. And that those curves are Apple's is at the bottom is still exponential. Android hasn't had quite the same sweep. But that's a cumulative total of the number of apps that have been downloaded in each. In bottom in the Apple, and the top is the Play, Android Play, Google Play, Android Store, App Store. So we see this increasing amount, and what that's doing is it's actually getting people more and more comfortable with the concept of a small tool that does something really well. It's useful. I carry it with me all the time. I have a problem. I use the tool. I no longer have the problem. And the consumers got quite comfortable with that, obviously. Those same consumers are also business people, of course. So they're able to carry that from their phones into their work lives. And so that was a critical component. The third trend that I think is really important as it relates very definitely to analytics, of course, is the open source analytic tool sets. And there's a whole cluster of these things, but R and Python and Hadoop. And their availability and the speed with which you can learn, and people solve point problems, and they give you a library so that you can go stand on their shoulders, and then they can stand on somebody else's shoulders, and you can make these things better, right? And so the capacity increases dramatically, but you don't actually have to go learn how to do all those things. You can just go borrow from somebody else's intelligent thought. You can refine it and then give it back, which is kind of a powerful, obviously a powerful concept. And this is it's hard to read, I think, but it's the number of Google Scholar hits. I was just trying to get some data to talk about this, but the number of Google Scholar hits for each of the different types of software. So the blue, the big curve, that's SPSS. The green, the second sort of high curve, SAS, or SAS. And then the kind of this little olive one, I guess, down here, that's R. That's starting to take off. And when you look at it, there's kind of a mark at about 2007, right? And they say in financial services market that the trend is your friend, and it's not their friend anymore, right? It's quite clear, and it's pretty dramatic how much it goes down. And if you actually just focus on the 4 down at the bottom and make the scale more relevant to them, the takeoff of R by comparison to Strata and Statistica and all the others is pretty dramatic, right? R is, they kind of say it's like maybe another 2 years at the same rate. And I know that's the first fallacy of forecasting, is extending the graph as if it will continue, which you can see these guys were hoping would have happened until a certain point. But that takeoff, that usage, that has just magnified. And there's a couple other things I wanted to show. So the top one talks about it's a loose set of sources, so this is not entirely valid research, I would say, but interesting statistics to look at nonetheless. Is you just look at the number of blogs that are talking about R and Python. It's really R, right? But the others, there's nobody. It's very limited. And you look at the data tools. So the bottom one is O'Reilly 2013 data science survey, asking about the tools that people use, and of course SQL, and then R, and then Python, right? And very down at the bottom is SAS and SPSS. I mean, it's a really small percentage of the people that are accessing those tools, whereas everybody else, it's more available, it's more usable, it's more accessible. And then the graph or the one on the right is the number of posts in a small set of places, but Stack Overflow is a really interesting one where a lot of programmers go to go find out about what's happening or ask questions and get responses, and you got nothing for. I mean, it's immaterial for SAS, SPSS, and Strata by comparison to R. So clearly this cluster of open source analytic tools have enabled a tremendous amount of people to get involved in these types of things. And the last one is advanced visualization. These guys talked a lot about, the previous group talked a lot about storytelling. And we would argue, or we would say that visualization is a critical component of that. And we would, that visualizations can inspire in a way that charts and tables they just can't. Is anybody here familiar with Anscombe's quartet? Yeah, you've seen it before. It's kind of cool. It's been around for a long time, 47 or something. No, 72. Sorry, different guy. So the stuff on the left is 4 data sets. They're 1, 2, 3, 4 across the top, right? They all have the same mean, the same variance of x, the same mean of y, and the same variance of y, and the same correlation between x and y, and a linear regression line that's exactly the same, right? And so a set of ways that we would describe it from a mathematical perspective, it's not all the ways, but a set of ways that we would describe it, we would say these are largely similar in many instances. And then when you get to it's critical to have the data as a foundation, obviously, but it doesn't stop there. But then when you get to the graphics, these are the same 4 sets. All of a sudden, the visual provides a great deal, a lot more meaning, a lot faster, without all the statistical explanation. I'm not saying statistical explanation is not relevant. I'm saying and the visualization for a large group of people not everybody, but for a large group of people, we humans tend to be more visual. Our memory, our emotional responses to, our ability to understand, our consumption of it, our ability to file it, our ability to do something with it, our ability to inspire us is better in a visual or a storytelling world than it is in a data or a statistic or a table-oriented world. And I know some people don't think that way, but the larger percentages of people, they do. Good visuals can actually bring about action. So this one, probably another you guys have seen. This is Charles Joseph Menard. I think it's been called the greatest infographic ever made. Or another one was the picture that made a nation cry. So this is Napoleon's march in the yellow into Moscow, and then the black is the retreat. The size of the line is the number of people. They start with 440,000 people. They end up with 10,000 by the time they get back. Each reduction is loss of life, from a variety of different things. Obviously battle at times, but a lot of it had to do with starvation, disease, and freezing to death. It was very, very brutal Moscow winter. This visualization, I think, is great, and it was really to replace a newspaper story for the most part, right? It was to tell the story, to show the impact. So the visual is obviously very powerful. I find it a bit more complex for the type of stuff that we do, because there's about, I think it's 8 variables that are embedded within this, that you can follow temperature, you can follow people, you can follow distance, there's time, there's all kinds of things that are in there. So it's a lot to consume. It's not that it's not powerful. I certainly would never be one to say this is not a good visual. I just think in the appification, this is complex. Now, sometimes, and this one I've taken from Gapminder. Does everybody know Hans Rosling? Seen the TED Talks? I was going to show the video, but I imagine most people here have seen this. But he takes, so on the left is life expectancy, and on the bottom is income per person. And this is a static point, but the value and power of what he's delivered is actually to show it over time, right? And the visual, you can see, one of the ones that stood out for me when you watch this over time is he shows the Spanish flu in 1920, and there's a big dip in all of the world's population from that. And it looks like a data blip, as if there's an error, but you can understand it, and you see the impact of it, that nearly 20% of the population dies, and then it moves up. And you can follow what he did is this is complex the way it's displayed in a single snapshot because there's so much information, but he reduces that complexity by saying, let's follow China. Everything else sits back, and China stays in front, and you can see how it moves up and becomes into such a strong position that it's in currently. And if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it, but it's a great way that they take visualization to explain data and to inspire an understanding that wouldn't have been possible prior to that. No way you would have consumed all of those tables to understand this information, right? And to see that over time, and the computing power actually enables the possibility of that. And just a little bit of PwC in here. What we're trying to do is extend this visualization. So this is a large scale. We call this the wall. So that's actually about 16 feet wide. So it's bigger than this, and four screens across the top, 4 on the bottom. And it enables data discovery. We can put up multiple charts at the same time. We can accelerate the feedback loop. You can change something and see the impact in other areas. And it facilitates collaboration for us in a lot of discussions. We would get a group of executives together and do a simulation. They would say, well, what about this or that? And we would be prepared, and you can show the impact of it. So you can run the simulation over there and then show where that's impacting various aspects of the business on a go-forward basis. So you don't lose the context as you show the change. So that's been enabled in this as we've advanced. And a lot of this was done with R-based code historically. So those 4 forces have changed a lot of things and have created the opportunity for my group to exist. And our objective, the way we frame it, is to build offerings that our consultants use to meet our clients' needs, and hopefully to do that brilliantly, such that it inspires action, that they want to come back to us and use another app to solve another problem. But the offerings are not apps, or I don't frame them as apps, or we don't frame them as apps or applications. We're just saying they're offerings. They're something that you use to solve your problem. That's what we're trying to do. And for our world, which is not everybody's world with apps, right? So if you were going to do an app for somebody in a consumer space, it has to be functional and usable with a UX level that is much different than what we do. We're going to make it usable for consultants, and then it needs to be customized a bit. And we're not trying to give the answer. It's not 42. We facilitate the insight. Sorry, bad old reference. Showing my age. We don't facilitate the insight. Or we facilitate the insight, we don't generate it. It's not an answer because they're tools, right? And they can be applied in many different ways. So for us, what's an app? It has distinct components of an analytics effort. This is pretty standard if you do analytics. There's data, lots of it, like we talked about. There's an analytic. It's very... there are a variety of different approaches. There are traditional... these guys were talking about marketing mix models being around for 50 years, I think. They've certainly been around for a long time, and there are many other analytical approaches that have been around for quite a long time. And then visualization, we think that's a critical component, making things look interesting and getting to the essence of the impact of the work that you're doing. But that's typical of an analytics effort. That's no different than any consulting project that we would normally do, fundamentally. We use all different, like I said, different kinds of analytics, from everything from structured to unstructured, and even some of the emerging stuff. You could make an argument that natural language processing isn't really emerging, as it's emerged quite a while ago, or relatively recently, I suppose. But that's the idea. Lots of different approaches. It also has components of a consulting engagement. So a value proposition and a business case. Those are important aspects of what we do in consulting, but they're also important aspects of what you do in presenting an app. Why do you care about using a particular tool? Right? You have to think about the benefit that's going to be provided associated with it. And then, of course, there's a consulting role and a project plan, because a lot of what we do takes an app and customizes it. Right? We'll use their data, company's data, or you just have to answer a slightly different question, because not all questions are exactly the same. So we try to be careful that, yes, we have kind of a hammer-ish type thing, but not a hammer that will only hit nails. It might need to be slightly different. And I won't extend the analogy too far. It just needs to be different sometimes. So that customization is a critical component of it. And then we put a wrapper, so code, architecture, and a presentation layer, the user experience component to it. And for me, what I call it is digital density. The underlying idea is that it has a place. It's like that tool. I know that I can go to the shelf and grab it. And I kind of stole it, as anything intelligent I say I've stolen from somebody else. I kind of stole it from Apple with their apps, right? Your iPhone is effectively a memory palace, right? It's people don't know what those are. But a memory palace is something created by the Greeks as a way for us to process information. So when you couldn't write everything down because you didn't have lots and lots of paper and certainly no computers, you had to remember data, information. And one of the ways that you did that was you created a memory palace in your mind. You could walk into a representation of a physical place. You could close your mind and you can imagine going into your home. And you could turn left at the first door, and in that door you could place visual things. And then you could close the door and walk back go into the next door. And a memory palace allows you to store lots of stuff. So the iPhone functions in a very similar way, right? Your first page, you probably know a lot of what's on your first page of your iPhone. You go to your second page, I know a few of those things, or I kind of know what's there. You go to your third page, and you're like, I have no idea. And then it starts, if you have lots of pages, you actually have to use a different mechanism of organizing, and one of those that they provided for us is the little rooms. And they put it into a room. It's about travel, or it's about transport, or it's about whatever you want, banks, financial services, or whatever. But it still has this digital density. I still know where it is, even though the app is kind of ephemeral and you can't really touch it and feel it and grab it. But it creates that memory imprint for us in a visual way. So we needed that same thing for our apps, and so we wrapped it in this code to give it this presentation layer. And then these aggregations, we call them apps, but they look a lot like any form of software. They can get complex, have lots of different things going on, handle massive amounts of data, handle small data, handle multiple different types of analytics, do one type of analytic, visualize a key point, visualize lots of different things. But you get the idea. So they could be big or they could be small. So these are examples of I don't think I would call them apps. I would call them kind of applets. So I worked at a company called Olive Tree Solutions, and we built signals from, as a startup that didn't start really, but kind of. It's still around. But what we build is each one of these stamps, is what we call them, is a particular signal. So the first one is price move for a particular stock. It's showing 3 months of price, and the 1 week change is at the 0.23%. So it's trying to bring out just kind of the key thing and the 0.23 over the last week, but also give you the context. So it's a single thing. The next one is EPS momentum, last 3 months of earnings momentum, and then the last 1 month is pulled out. And then short interest, what was the change over the 1 week, and then it's showing you the 5-day change. And the CDS and divergence. So the divergence one is showing the signal of the price move in the last month versus the EPS move in the last month versus the short interest versus the CDS and versus the volatility. So you can actually see the equity price versus a bunch of other price elements in the market associated with the underlying security. Each of these could be imported like a data point and could be placed into an application. So apps get shrunk down, and so the analytic is in there, the data is certainly in there, and then there's a visual presentation that's in there that can then be taken instead of the data and represented inside of different software tools. So that we see these big apps, and then we see these little small ones, and we're kind of playing across each of the spaces. The way we build them, pretty standard lean startup, sort of agile way. I stole this language from the prototyping guys at Google. So we focused in the first couple of phases about building the right it, and then building it right. Those become critical components for us that we separate the two from an investment perspective. We call it 4 phases. So we propose, we pilot, we produce, and we promote or extend. So we're prototyping in a very visual way. Implying, so we're actually doing the third bit that we talked about of that bundle. We're doing the third bit first so that you can get a sense of what it is. And then we pilot the analytic. Can we actually do it? And the data, can we pull it in? Right? And then we do that a few times until somebody says, yeah, that's what we need. You've solved my problem. And we narrow the focus down to a small batch, to a tiny component that we care about. And then once we decide that we've got the right it, that the app is sufficiently defined, that we then switch to producing it and scaling it. So we're productizing it in phase 2, and then we're extending it and creating a platform in phase 3, if you will. And through that entire process, it's all about build, test, learn in the lean startup way. But for the reason we do this is because the bulk of appification is about reducing complexity, and you're taking all your data and figuring out what are the things that you need. So reducing the complexity of all the elements that are there and the combination of it, combining it together, but simplifying that. It's about using the right analytic to get to an insight and simplifying the output. And the visualization is about simplifying the communication of it and telling the story. It's all hard. This is what we found. I can imagine it, I can spec it out, and I can build it, and I get exactly what I asked for, except for it's not what I want. And it just happens too frequently. So we stop having the expectation that we'll be able to do that in any short period of time, that it requires an iterative process, and that's kind of what we've built here. And some of the type of things that we've built, these analytic apps, so this is a supply chain analytics offering. We called it supply chain resilience model. It's kind of like, the way I think about it, it's like bamboo. You're trying to look at your supply chain and say, can it bend when there are shocks, or does it break? And if it breaks, that's an opportunity to fix it. So you've got to create a simulation model, and then you've got to visualize what does that look like, and then you've got to identify where the breaks are. And if those breaks occur, then you've got to start to develop how you solve that. So the simulation model is a great way to interact with customers to talk to them about what's possible. The next one, example, we did demand estimator. What this helps focus on is your good geographies, your good segments, your good products, and your good channels, or your good channels and your good products. Those 4 areas. We did this in healthcare because the data set is great in healthcare, right? You don't have a single payer like you do in Europe, but you have a dominant payer that requires, from a regulatory perspective, a great deal of information be delivered. We can gather that all and say, for a hospital that we've never gotten any data from them for, we can tell them how they compare to everybody else in their market. What are their best performing hospitals? What are their worst performing hospitals? What are their best performing teams or groups? Is it cardiovascular or is it another form of surgery? And you can then say, and how do you compare to the rest of the nation? So before they've given us any data, this app helps us talk to them about possible problems. I think about it as smoke, and then we get in there, they give us their data, we validate it, so fire, identify that there is some fire, and then fix. That's what we do. So the app helps facilitate that process. And then just one more to kick it off is we have this one called Social Mind, which is actually, we started it out as social listening, but it becomes customer listening. So all the social data is, again, not freely available. It's available. It's expensive, but you can get it. I don't have to ask a company for it. And I can put a structured taxonomy to that analysis with my natural language processing to get to both what's said that's important, listen to this, ignore that, and then I can also get sentiment associated with it by looking at the word choice that's made, again, in the natural language processing analysis. So it gives me a slice of the customer pie around a particular problem. It could be emerging risk. It could be customer experience. And then, so that's the smoke. And then the fire is we go into the company, get their other channel information, their call center information, unstructured, voice stuff, and we make it structured. We get their email, unstructured text, and make it structured, and we get their chat and anything else. And we may supplement that with additional surveys, right, to fill gaps so that you kind of fill out that customer pie, if you will. We're proving the capability, and then with the app, and then we're doing the work once we get into the engagement with the client. So the apps actually build trust, show capability, and help us win more work, I guess is kind of what we're trying to do. So that's what we've done with appification of analytics. And I take some questions, or if anybody has any.
Yes, thank you so much. That was terrific. Yes, let's give him a hand. So we do have 10 minutes for questions. So does anybody have any questions about Appyfying data?
Hi. I think one of the aspects of one of the motivations of building an app is for the consultants to become smart as fast as possible.
Sure.
Right? So how much of the app experience is standardized or customized? Like how can consultants actually generate custom reports if they are going to a client and make a smart point?
Yeah. It's a constant discussion for us, so I think it's a good question. It depends on what you mean by customization. So so the demand estimator one, we were looking at hospitals. If I'm looking at your hospital and I say one set of things to you based on what is surfaced by the data versus going into another hospital and I look at talk about another set of things that's surfaced by the data, effectively I'm customized. So some of what's happened with the increase in the amount of data is that our ability to have a customized conversation is increased dramatically because I don't have to go ask for the data before I can tell you something interesting. And I think that's one of the upfront benefits that we have from an app perspective. But even beyond that, I think we try to build in a bit of flexibility and a recognition that not everybody's problem set is the same. They rhyme. They don't look exactly the same. So we go in there and we may create new capabilities. And that agile process that we use to build the app is what we use to do the new capabilities. And we often find that if somebody wants that with company A, company B kind of think that would be interesting too. Right? So it helps us evolve the capabilities of the app based on what our clients care about. So I like customization. And if I see that pattern multiple times, then we carry that over into the next version of whatever it is that we build.
How can the consultant input for that, for the requirement of the customization?
Sorry, I'm not quite sure I understand. How can the consultant input for it?
App is a limited real estate, right?
Yeah.
When you have app
so that's the thing. So we're calling an app. If you think about a phone-based app or a traditional kind of view of what apps are, then yes, it has limited real estate. We don't have that, right? That's why I kind of don't care about the definitions that people have had historically. Is it we're much more like an application. If you want another screen, we'll do another screen, right? So you think about the information architecture and the presentation layer. The app component is much more the executive summary, and then the tell me more. You can have multiple layers, and then the tell me everything kind of in the next tier allows you to handle the customization. So it allows you to drill down, and then you can go wide as well. But you still have to have that executive summary, which is the simplification element. So I think they're both enabled. Is that?
Yeah.
Cool.
Do we have any other questions? Yep.
In one of your slides, you said 60-80% of the time that it actually is
on the
is
ETL.
On the ETL thing. Can you comment on that, and what kind of technique you typically use to separate or just how to improve that?
Yeah. I think it's a really good question. It's actually something I've been putting to our team. Consistently, it's the problem. So if you think about that sort of, put it in the consultant's world. So I'm not saying this is all situations. I'm saying this is us and what we do. So a lot of times a consultant has to walk in and say, if you could give me a little data, I'll tell you a little bit about your company, right? I know it's kind of the new version of take your watch and tell you what time it is, but if you could give me a little data, I'll tell you a little bit more about you, right? When they give you data, many companies have it in funny, different forms. And when you're asking to solve a particular problem, there's a little bit from over there and a little bit from over there. And so you end up having to mash it together. That process is hard. Is the best way I can. We've not come up with a magic solution, a magic formula, a silver bullet. No answer yet. Right? There's some tools that are getting better at this. Some tools like Anzo, I think, is really interesting with semantic web stuff, where relational web requires you to define the relationships between your data sets versus the semantic web just goes and finds the relationships. So for quick and dirty stuff, that can actually be a really powerful way to go. So some of the new emerging technologies help support that. And then connect that into your Hadoop stuff so you can see all this data, and then you can make all the connections without being forced to. So it's the unsupervised version of the clustering, I guess, versus the supervised. That actually seems to have some positive potential. But the short answer is we find it hard. I wish I had a better answer.
So this is kind of fascinating. You have these apps that can produce summary data.
I'll take that as a good thing. Kind of fascinating. That's good.
Well, yes, absolutely. So what I was thinking was that it's giving me data, but then there might be times where I want to give it data, and then it would go up to
absolutely,
a Internet of Things kind of space where it could
we haven't
be
gone that far.
Summarized and get feedback, and so
you're too many steps ahead. You're too many steps ahead. All possible in the future, but not for us. But the giving it data, absolutely. Right. In simulation modeling, you have a framework for the simulation model, but you have to define the constraints among many other things in order to determine what possible futures could exist. Right, and then you have to input the actual variables. So there's always a process of ingesting data into the analytic. There are multiple layers of this. Sometimes it's external data, and sometimes it's internal data. It's really the combination that we find where the most value is had, because most people like a lot of the stuff that we're doing. And in the examples that I talked about, it's a benchmark. Here's where we are versus where everybody else is. Is that good or bad? Right? And if you think about sort of normal distributions, you're looking at the tails, right? A lot of data science is trends and outliers. So we look at the tails, and the good tails, the stuff that we do really well, can we do more of that? And the bad tails, can we stop doing that and fix it? And so then your mean moves, but you always have a tail. So you're always thinking about new data as it comes in, and then new fixes and It's kind of an ongoing pursuit of mastery, right? To get better at whatever it is that you do. Yeah, always.
Thank you.
Any other questions? These are great. We're getting some great answers. We've got about 1 more minute. We can take 1 more question.
So with your apps, you're dealing with a wide variety of knowledge levels. How do you communicate the more complex things such as certainty, uncertainty, and you're probably not showing confidence intervals. You're not doing any of that. But I mean, what's the best communication tool to tell people that these predict what your confidence levels are?
Okay, so you're I think hitting on a really important point that is, to me, is the fundamental difference between sort of what statistics says and then what you should do, right? Having confidence and then saying that's the decision that I make and the path that I should go down are different things. It helps me feel better, but if there's a possibility it might be the other thing, because there always is a possibility that it might be the other thing, you kind of, it can still happen just because you have really high confidence that it's unlikely to happen. It could still happen. And financial services, a lot of the stuff you can't talk normal distribution, and the percentages associated with that, and you have no idea what the actual distribution is from a shock because we just know it's not normal, right? So we tend to stay away from that. It's not like we're trying to give you certainty. We're trying to provide you more context so that your decision is a better decision or a more well-informed decision. If this is the range of information that you could possibly know, and typically you make a decision on this small dot of it, we'd like to expand that dot, with evidence, with support, with data, so that you have more confidence. But it's not confidence in the statistical sense, it's confidence in the gut sense, right? Because you're talking about business decisions and directions that people can make. Unless you can constantly sense and respond, which is a bit more of the stuff that a couple of these people were talking about with their multivariate testing and the A/B testing. We put it out there. Do they like it? Oh, okay. Well, new champion challenger kind of thing. They switch them out. There are certain instances where that works really well, but that's not confidence either. This might work. Let's go see if it does. So we try to do a lot of that where we can, but we call them small batch sizes. You steal it. You test in small groups so that if you fail, it doesn't hurt. Right? If you have to make a big bet and you get it wrong, it hurts.
Do you feel like maybe your audience is overestimating then the accuracy of these, or of what you're providing, or underestimating? I mean, I'm just kind of wondering when you give them a small app,
Yeah, that's right.
And you're not giving that information, could they be misinterpreting?
Anytime you do a statistic, I think things can be misinterpreted, absolutely. So we don't try to make it just one statistic that you're doing and you make a decision on it. We try to boil things down to a couple that matter and can show impact. But I also don't like point estimates. I like range estimates a lot better, especially when you're talking about the future, because we know we're wrong. We just don't know by which direction and how much. So we just try to place it in context. I think it's without it, you're more likely to make a bad decision. It doesn't mean that you will always make a perfect decision, but you are more likely to make a good decision with it. That's the way I tend to frame it.
Terrific. Great. Well, thank you, guys. Andrew, thank you so much. Can we give him a round of applause?
Thanks.